Okay, this is a quick video about Alfred Adler. He was a psychiatrist. He was briefly, a protege of Freud, as was Carl Jung. They both sort of fell out with Freud because they felt Freud had overemphasized sexuality in his psychoanalysis theory. I like Adler because his concept of an inferiority complex was very important to me for making a difficult transition in my life. And it also fits in with Dabrowski's theory of personality. And these things are really helpful to help a person bounce back from a difficult time in their life. And that's an important thing because I've seen a lot of people with high amount of talent, high IQs, but they just can't handle a failure. You're going to have disappointments and failure in your life. Your kids are going to go through this, and being resilient, able to bounce back from stuff is an important feature. So, life is typically, 2 steps up, knock back down a step, 2 steps up, knock back down a step. But if you keep on taking those steps up, it's slow, it takes longer than you want, but you make progress. So Alfred Adler lived from 1870 to 1937. His concept was the inferiority complex, and he talked about how people often feel inferior about something that's very important to them. And then they come to a crossroads where they can decide to deal with it or just give up. And he basically believed you make an ideal image of yourself. What's your ideal version of yourself that you think you might be able to achieve? And then you can decide, am I going to go for it or not? And you have to make a bunch of short-term goals to try to get you towards it rather than just give up. You got to be going for something or you stagnate and you start going downhill. And so what Adler says is that the feeling of inferiority, it's not a disease. It's rather something to motivate you to strive for becoming the best you can be version of yourself. And sometimes the greater the feeling of inferiority, the more you can energize yourself to bounce back. Sort of say, well, I failed at this thing that I wanted to succeed, but now I'll take that energy and I'll put it into this other goal. And there's a lot of examples of that. Demosthenes, the Greek, was a poor speaker, and his family had been ripped off of all their money, so he had to teach himself how to speak well so he could articulate his case in Athenian court system, and he became a great speaker. A lot of psychiatrists, psychologists will often specialize in treating their own mental problem and trying to help themselves. Okay, so the quote from Adler, we strive to overcome our feeling of inferiority by trying to achieve our self-ideal. Another example is Dave Schultz, the wrestler. He's the brother of Mark Schultz. They're both national, world, and Olympic champions now, but when Dave Schultz was a kid, he was fat. He had dyslexia. He got teased a lot by the other kids, bullied by the other kids, and went out for wrestling, and he saw, by learning wrestling technique, I can become a lot stronger. Kids won't pick on me anymore. And, he became a world champion. Adler calls his version of psychology individual psychology. He would sit face to face looking at the patient rather than the aloof style of Freud, sitting with his back to the patient. And Freud did that because he wanted to let the patient sort of freely speak and whatnot, but Adler felt that a good therapist should, want to know about the patient's family relationships, how they've shaped their worldview and goals. So we get to know the patient more rather than just like a lot of these modern biological psychiatrists just label the patient as a disease. You are schizophrenic, major depression disorder, just take this pill. And, that doesn't work very well. Adler focused more on the future rather than psychoanalysis is too much focused on the past. It can get a person to obsess and be sort of trapped in their past and sort of annoy their family rather than focus on the future and what you could do rather than blaming your problems on other people. Focus on what you can aspire to in the future. So Adler, like Jung, felt the social context of a lot of things was much more important than Freud was always emphasizing repressed sexuality. Adler came to America in about 1935, but he died young of a myocardial infarction, which sort of limited what else he might go on to achieve. Okay, now the work of Adler's concept of inferiority complex, very much an inferiority principle, very much ties in with Casimir Dabrowski. Dabrowski lived from 1902 to 1980. He was a Polish psychiatrist. And by the way, he came up with a theory of personality disintegration, reintegration that is super popular amongst gifted students, gifted education. And it's basically how does a person bounce back from failure, sadness, and defeat. And again, you need to have this if you want to be a successful person. So I'll just give you one example that happened in my life. I was a great athlete in high school. Then I got injured and I couldn't compete my senior year in a state tournament. All the Big Ten schools lost interest in giving me a scholarship. Stanford still offered it to me. And I had recurrent injury problems with my shoulder, with my knee for a little while. And I mentioned that because all the guys I hung around with, I used to be, well, most of them I was better than them. Then they became better than me. And there were other new guys that came into the thing like the Schultz brothers. I was never anywhere near as good as those guys. But what I'm trying to say is I was low man on the totem pole. And I really didn't like being low man on the totem pole. And it sort of energized me to study. It was sort of like, well, if I can no longer be a great athlete, I'm going to try to become a great student. And so I was very excited about school. I would get up first thing in the morning and I could study. Of course I take study breaks, but what I'm trying to say is I had the energy to study all day long, day after day, week after week, after month, because I see so many students and they can only study for a couple hours. They're bored. They're not interested. They hate school. The class is a pain in the ass. The teacher, they don't like the teacher. And what I'm trying to say is this is why philosophy is so important. I was like, thank you, God. My life isn't over because I'm not a wrestler anymore. I could become a great student. Thank you, God, for giving me an option. And man, I'd bounce out of bed and be just excited to study all day. And so that's one of the things I think is a big controlling variable in how much academic work a person's capable of. It's, do they have that attitude? Okay, and I would have the attitude, biochemistry is the language of God. If I could learn the language of God, how he creates life, then someday I could become a great doctor and a great scientist. And I was excited about it. And I had a friend who was excited about it too, and we talked to each other about it, and that was good. So what I'm trying to say is, if you think, the only purpose of school is just to get a grade, it's going to be hard to become that good at it. And versus you have to do what you have to do to take a test in your class. But if you have this higher aspiration, I'm not just interested in biology for this class or physiology for this class. I'm interested because this is going to lead me to much bigger insights that are going to be, special and good, and I'll be able to help other people. And, that whole psychology and growth mindset really makes a positive, major difference in your energy level. And it's that energy level. Tons of guys I know at higher IQs than me and stuff, but most of them, they don't have much intellectual curiosity. Okay, an educator's most important task is to see that no child is discouraged at school. Education is only possible with children who look hopefully and joyfully upon the future. There's a quote from Alfred Adler. So he was good about that, and I've seen that from kids, and I've done some tutoring in the past and stuff. The kid has to believe in themselves, believe in their possibility for education in order to do well. They have to see a way to navigate the class. So that's a big part of what a teacher does. Just helping them memorize a fact by itself doesn't do much. Teaching them how to, learn the study skills, learn the way to play the game for whatever that class is. Let's see. There's only one reason for an individual to sidestep to the useless side, the fear of defeat on the useful side. So you got to give the kid hope. Now here's Alfred Adler on depression. You can be healed of depression if every day you begin the first thing in the morning to consider how you will bring real joy to someone else. We must interpret a bad temper as a sign of inferiority. Alfred Adler. Yeah, that's an important point too. When somebody has a bad temper, don't just think they're a jerk or whatever. Ask yourself, well, why do they feel that way? A lot of times it's because something's wrong in their life, and it might even be your fault. Adler then, every therapeutic cure, any attempt to show the patient the truth, tears him from his freedom from responsibility and therefore must reckon with most vehement resistance. Alfred Adler. So yeah, that's like when you tell somebody, look, the reason you're fat and sick is because you eat meat and processed food. You need to stop doing that, and they get all pissed off. It's a very common thing. They don't want to have to take responsibility. They'd rather blame it on their genetics, but they don't get better until they do. Okay, educator must believe in the potential power of the pupil and employ all his art in seeking the pupil to experience this hope and this power. So anyways, Alfred Adler, I just think his inferiority principle really helped me, and his tie-in with the same thinking process of Dabrowski, and that's why I showed this. Hope that was helpful.